Recording, Mr. Nato. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So it is Wednesday, October 14th, and we are in the Finance Committee meeting. We're still operating under the governor's emergency orders for the pandemic. So we are on Zoom, which you could find at the school district website. And there's also a dial-in number and a meeting ID there. You can always watch this video later for your viewing pleasure if you so choose. Our last meeting was the 30th of September, and we spent some time with the Hudson documents and talking about the depth and detail there and what we might mimic and what we might choose to not mimic. And that's all in that last meeting. And Steve talked about some of the budget drivers, which are fairly significant on health insurance, an increase in New Hampshire retirement costs to the district, and of course the building bond, and the unknowns of operating in a pandemic. And we also talked a little bit about some revenue questions, which we'll review again tonight in context of fund balance and Article 10. So does that sound about right for the review?
That's great.
Yep, and we should approve those minutes. So if there's a motion to do that.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
All right, Norm.
Aye.
There we go.
Steve votes yay.
And Michelle?
Michelle votes yay.
And Rob Nato votes yes as well. So Steve, if you could share the budget outline, that would be good. And I could I have it on my computer. If you want to give me screen sharing, I could.
Sure. I don't know what happened. Yeah, sure. I will make sure that you can share, Rob.
All right.
And there you go.
So I just click on the document. Is that how that works?
Yeah, hit underneath the green button that says green share, hit that.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And then double click and you should be fine.
All right. So come on, baby.
And I can swap it if you need it.
Can you see that?
Not yet.
Nope.
No. Well.
Want me to grab it?
Yeah, I think you're gonna need to grab it, Steve.
No problem.
Something about my preferences and privacy here.
How's that?
There we go. So this document was just basically an outline of what is already in our budget bulletin to show the depth of information that's already available. And Steve, I did play around with the reformatting. Doing it in Word was certainly a challenge because things were jumping around. But I think if we just have a conversation when the time comes, there are things that we could probably do formatting wise. But I think the thing to reinforce here is there is a significant amount of information in the budget bulletin. And if you could scroll down just a little bit, Steve. So you see the broad categories there where you've got 19 different elements that are covered, and they're all representative and explained in terms of what one person would find there. And so I think, you know, we would continue to want to use this format. And what we suggested after looking at Hudson was to provide some more detailed information by building. So if we go to the next. So this was developed as an outline format with the help of all of the school principals. And we were talking about trying to get at what is the cost to run certain elements of programs at each of the schools without getting into the depth of individual items as to, you know, what supplies are being purchased in the world language department and those kinds of things. So as a header, you'd see regular education with the salary costs and the supply costs for the entire school on the top. And then by department, you would see the same. So arguably one would be able to infer from that what it costs to run world language or PE and changes accordingly. And then, yep.
So, and so you envision a page, right? A page in the middle of high school with overall, and then the math department broken out, and you talk about just two two areas, the salaries in the math department and the supplies in the math? Would you go to books, Rob? Would you go to information tech? We just want to make sure we know how deep you want to go. And I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, and I think, that if we go to, so the principal shared with me sort of their budget reporting or preparation documents, which are pretty detailed. And it sort of gets into that level of what we saw in the Hudson documents. And so, I mean, my personal feeling is that it's not necessary to get into those lines because I don't like that micromanaging piece. But it does give you some more sense instead of just saying supplies for the middle high school, supplies by department. And then if there were questions and if there was a particular uptick, somebody might be able to say, well, in the science department, they had to buy X amount of equipment, but not get into the details of what equipment. I mean, if they asked the question, obviously we would answer it.
No, and usually I have in the past talked about books in mass at the school. Like sometimes a couple of years ago, it would have been $30,000 or $40,000 in books by the time you do a world language, a science, and a math.
Right.
And so I do report that out, and if it's a budget driver, if you will, in some respects, that's some years that's a lot of money what we spend in those departments. But I don't foresee that coming this year,
Right.
as you and I've already talked about. So the point might be moot.
Yeah. So, Norm, do you have any questions there or?
So you'd be doing salaries of last budget and then this budget comparison, the increase for each department. So math, you'd have last year's numbers, and then this year, and then the percentage of increase or decrease is what you guys would be doing.
Yeah.
Okay.
If I'm understanding Chris and Amy and Bill correctly, we could probably go back 2 years and do this year's because I think they have all that data.
3-year average, yeah.
In their planning reports.
I would think that'd be great. Any more than that, you're talking about a bigger document where people are going to be.
Yeah. And does that make sense, Steve? I mean, is that accurate that those planning documents give you that information?
I'll yield to Michelle on that. Michelle, do you think we can come up with the last 2 years?
Well, yeah, but like, for instance, the salaries, the principals have nothing to do with that. That comes from my department. So they don't, and like in supplies, it's kind of, I just want to make sure, is it just supplies? Because like Steve mentioned, the 600 object includes the 610, which is supplies, but it also includes like, if there was software, that's 650. If it was books, it's 641. I just didn't know if it needs to tie anywhere.
Right.
Like usually we have things tie. So like the detailed pages, which I get that to some isn't detailed enough, which is fine, but that gets a little bit deeper in and talks about FTEs and stuff. Those categories tie with the big spreadsheet by function. And so I'm just trying to grab, my head around, is it just supplies? So then it's the 600 isn't going to tie to this document because it's just 610.
Got it.
To give an example.
So let me give you a specific here because I'm looking at what Bill shared with me. So for Harold Martin School, for instance, in English, he's got a line for general supplies. He's got a line for AV supplies. He's got a line for books. He's got a line for reference materials. And then he's got a line for additional new furniture, etc. So all of that is what it takes to fund the quote unquote ELA or English department at Harold Martin School. And then it's similar by other breakouts, whether it's music or art. And he's got this going back to 2017. And it shows it as a budget unit. And then it's got the account numbers as well.
Steve, when you get the information from Bill and Chris and all that, so they look at the sheet from their teachers and they make adjustments and then they submit it to you. Is that what happens?
Yes, and Then it gets turned to, so it starts with a teacher, then it becomes a principal budget.
Mhm.
And then Michelle and I sit with Matt, Mandy, Michelle and I talk, and all the principals. And to be honest with you, they defend their budget. They explain to me the increases, the decreases, the philosophy, what their objectives of this budget. And we sit knee to, well, in the past we sat knee to knee. I don't know if this year we're going to be sitting knee to knee, but we've sat knee to knee. And I take notes. I have lots of questions. Usually they have homework. They have to go back and get homework. And then we meet as a leadership team, and we spend about 3 hours going through the budget. Everybody explains the priorities in their budget. And then I take everything and insight and turn it into the superintendent's budget. And to be honest with you, I reduced the building budgets. I don't think I've ever added to the building budgets in my time as a year, but we have moved some stuff around sometimes. And then I present that. But yes, it starts teacher, then they close teacher. That means teachers can't change it anymore. Then it goes to principal, and then it goes to soup. And then principals can't touch it anymore. Then it goes to the board. And then once the board budget is, I can't touch it anymore. You know what I mean? So once the board adopts a budget, if the board would have to, because they vote, right? The board votes on the final value. And then if they want to change it, they vote again. And that has happened. We negotiated a reduction with a budget committee, and the board came back and reauthorized a lower number that got the budget committee's support. That's the mechanics process of how budget passes through.
Do we ever see what you decide to take off?
Yes.
So we get to see what you reduced from
Yep.
Okay.
And I present that at tier 0.
Okay.
What I cut, if you remember, the tiers, and not saying that we have to do the tiers, but tier 0s is what I've cut. And sometimes I also say what the administrators cut.
Yeah.
I think, and I don't know if Dan's listening, but I'm not sure if it was Chris or me, Michelle, who cut the golf cart last year. It might have been Chris, but it was me. But if you didn't guess, we don't have a golf cart this year.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you.
You bet.
So Michelle, the title of the document I'm looking at is the proposed HMHS or HMS budget report for 2021.
Yeah, that's a document that I create.
Right.
Yeah.
And essentially what I'm suggesting here is that those totals would be what's being used to, what I'm calling supplies, or maybe the different word is cost to run that department.
Yeah, only because like equipment is not a supply, so it's in a different account structure. So I guess I'm understanding it but we're missing a piece because we're missing like the benefit part of it too. Is that going to be a lump too? Because in order to get a cost of and Harold Martin, we don't break out like math because it's really every grade does a little bit of math as their thing. But like when we get to 6th grade at Maple, that's when we start breaking out by area or subject, if you want to call it. So while at Harold Martin for the math, the supplies and equipment and all that kind of stuff might be, let's just say $12,000 because we have like math and focus. But then we don't have the salary and benefits because they're in a grade salary and benefit.
Yeah, I think Steve, if you want to scroll down to Harold Martin School.
Absolutely.
We just focused on the supplies within those areas and not on the salaries, just because that's not how the school is structured. But I think we're talking the same thing, Michelle. It's just a matter of, if I were sitting next to you with this document, we could probably figure out how to make it work.
That's one of my favorite planning documents, Rob, and Michelle prepares it for me. So I think that's a great place to start. And we can sit, we can go to the conference room, you, me and Michelle, and spread out and look at it. I think would be a great thing to do.
Because that, however you guys think is best to give that level of detail, using that as a part of what I think folks are looking for. So maybe we should just plan some time to do that. And
Yeah.
That would.
Absolutely. I think that'd be a great, because that is, and it looks of what was budgeted is also what was expended, which is nice.
Yes, and it shows the increase and the decrease, and then it shows the actual. So it's similar, you got proposed budget, increase, decrease, and then actual.
Yeah.
And then you've got a couple of years going out. So
yes, let's do that. I'll Donna set up a time for us.
Okay.
So are we gonna break out salaries, benefits, supplies, or are you lumping the benefits into the salaries? I think it'd make 3 would be what I would like to see, Rob, like we talked about. I'm not individually, but
right.
salaries, benefits, and then
I mean,
if that's possible.
I guess if you've got the categories of salaries and benefits already in the broad district-wide thing. So I guess I don't know what the purpose of doing it by department would be. And if it's easy to do, I suppose you could do it because you've got the person, what their package costs, but.
I mean, it's lumped in because you have,
it's lumped in depending on how much. If you break it by regular ed, it's at Herald, it's lumped in. If you break it by art and music, those are singletons, just remember.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And school counselor is a singleton. I mean, it's just up to you. I'm just, we're so small that it's not like Hudson where you have 4 elementary school counselors.
Right.
Just something to think about.
It's a start from what we had from last year.
I think as we move down into the, in guidance services at the lower elementary schools, you'd have that similar thing. Health services, there's 1 nurse.
Right.
How we would want to do that. And what we had talked about what I had talked about with the principals was pulling out the psych, the PT, the OT, again, because it was that was more of a district function than a school-wide function, and the slice it and dice it by school didn't seem to make a lot of sense in terms of the ability to get it, to the dollar of what it might actually be. So Steve, what do you think, or Michelle, should we just schedule some time to sit down with this and just agree that this is a path to perhaps go forward and we just need to work on it some more?
Yeah, I think so. Having the document in the same room, and normally we can all meet. I mean, it's not a quorum of the board. It's, this is a work group, so it's fine.
That's fine.
And we can meet. I'll have Donna work on it, and Rob, if you have that, bring that, and Michelle will produce one, and we'll take a look at how we can adapt that to planning documents, public planning documents. I think it is a report that Michelle has made for me, and I really appreciate it because I've used it quite a bit by each area, so I think it's great.
Yeah, maybe if we just get them from each, have them from each of the buildings because they're slightly different, obviously. That'd be good. Bill mentioned, they all mentioned that it's, something that they rely on to build their budgets and helpful information. Steve, you want to talk about, can we go back to talk about the revenue scenario for next year? We had said that we're looking at a pretty deep hole with a couple of causes.
Absolutely. Just so remember, there's two areas that come to form the tax rate. And we talked about the expense side last week and embedded increases of health insurance, our last meeting, health insurance. This is an actuary retirement year. And we have also the pandemic costs and things that we've talked about. The other side that it goes into the total financial picture of the district is revenue. And so what we've known, and we've been very transparent about this, is that last year in the committee of conference, the legislature and the governor came together and increased for the first time a significant increase in adequacy, an extra payment. Remember, it wasn't embedded in the formula of about $650,000. And the commissioner sent us all a letter saying that, please, this is a one-time piece, meaning don't hire staff on it, right? Don't add 3 teachers of the 650 because you won't have those 3 teachers next year. So we got, so if they haven't figured out the state budget yet, but if that is not included, that would be $650,000 less in revenue. The other piece that's going to impact us, and the board is going to see October enrollment tomorrow. It's today, Wednesday? Yeah, tomorrow night, October 1st enrollment. And so adequacy, remember we spent some time on adequacy, about 3,800 per child, and then there's
Right.
differentiated aid. So we are, our October 1 average daily membership. Now, this is where we just, we report the enrollment continually throughout the year. But on October 1, it's about 930 something, Rob. We're down about 120, 140, 130 kids. I have the number for you tomorrow. So that is, it's not 140, sorry, down 40 kids.
Yeah,
Thanks,
I
Norm.
just got really nervous.
Norm, your
You
face
think
was
it
very
was-
helpful there, just so you
Yeah.
know, because I knew that number was off. And so I meant to say it'll be about $120,000. 40 kids is about $120,000 in revenue. That's where the 100 came from. Sorry, it's not 120 kids.
So can I
So
stop there 'cause I have a question. So are these 40 kids strictly homeschooled kids that no longer have anything to do with our district, where they're not, this is not remote, this is just homeschool kids that we're not doing anything for pretty much,
good
correct?
question. I would say the biggest change in our enrollment is increase in homeschool kids. And now,
Okay.
now if they join us for some portion of the day that we can quantify, we can get some percentage of, if they're there a half a day, we can get a half a day. It's very clean at the high school because if they come for a world language class, there is an attendance in that class. Elementary, to be honest with you, we're going to have to figure this out because this is the first time it's been this kind of significant numbers. So we've got the 650. We've got, let's say, 30 kids at 4,000 a kids. That's 120. And then the question is, well, what's the good picture? And we did, thank you. I mean, the board made a really strong decision and filled up Article 10 as much as possible. So our tax rate stabilization fund has never had more money in it in the history of the fund. It has almost, Michelle probably has the number, but it's about pretty close to 390,000, I think. It's a big number. That's a really good thing. The other piece where we get opportunities where the board has discretion over revenue is fund balance. And just to take us back a little bit, when we prepared the December, January FY21 budget, we reset the the fund balance to 150. And that was a loss, a reduction in revenue about $350,000 because in the year before it was about 500. You with me?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And remember how much I struggled and Michelle and I struggled. We had to freeze budgets to get to that 500 every year. It became untenable.
Mhm.
So we reset it. It was a bitter pill to swallow because that meant our tax rate was up 30 cents, Rob and Norm, right? Just because we chose to do that. And that's, to the board's credit, that's called realistic actual budgeting, right? We didn't just fake a number of 500 and put it in there. We had a real number. And Michelle and I were really excited to do that because that would have given us some flexibility. Then we went into COVID land, right? That budget didn't pass. And then we had Michelle produced at the request of the board savings to the pandemic, and that was 240. And we felt the right thing was to do was return that back to tax rate relief. And so we went from 150 to 390. And so that number used to be 500. It's now 390. So that delta between the 390 and whatever the board goes higher counts as revenue. So if the board wanted to, and I'm not saying this, Steve, we want to go to 600, right? We want to really do it. That would be a $210,000 increase in revenue. That would hurt. It would be hard for us to do, right? Because we'd have to cut and save, but that's how it works. That value is on the good side of the ledger of revenue. Like Michelle and I will not be recommending this year we go anything below 390. We can meet the 390. Right. And I'd probably recommend we go to 490, to be honest with you, another 100 at least, and maybe even a little bit more, depending on where we are with COVID and things like that. So we're going to have to make up somehow the 650 and the 120, which is, 120 from enrollment we have the tax rate stabilization fund, about 390, and we have a little bit of play if we decide to increase the fund balance. And then we'll see. We just got the first estimate of adequacy. Michelle and I will look at that and see where we're at, and things like that. And remember, what we also did, we also conservatively budgeted revenue from food service. That's going to help us too, right? Because we don't have to make up that extra 100, remember? And so at least we didn't hurt ourselves there. But the revenue side, unless, you know, we don't know what the state's going to do with the federal government. People are going to, right, the people, municipalities all over the country are going to struggle, and they're talking about a stimulus package with money coming to towns, and we just don't know that yet.
All right, can I ask a quick question, Steve?
Yes.
Because I'll totally lose it. So we have to use a little bit of the unanticipated fund balance to cover the loss on the revenue side of having about 40 kids that are no longer in enrollment, correct?
We could do that, yep.
And my other question for you is there a snapshot of when the state says, hey, this is what is considered your enrollment in order to be 4,000?
No, it's actually, we have to report it regularly. It used to be a snapshot, and they changed the law. So we upload our ADM to the state. And I'm sorry, Matt would have to tell me if it's quarterly. It might be monthly. I forget exactly. But when I first started being the superintendent, it was fixed. But they found there was so much volatility. Because if you're in a big districts and between October 1 and June 1st, if you went up 200, you would like some revenue for that 200. Conversely, if you obviously you go down, but there is actually a minimum. When they give you the adequacy, it cannot fall any lower. And for years, like this year, I bet you Michelle will use the guarantee amount versus the higher amount, just because we don't know about our enrollment. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I think the last one I have for Rob knows, what is the tax impact on the 641,000 that we would be missing? What is that number?
13 cents times 6 is 78 plus 6, 84 cents.
84 cents.
If you give me an ish. Michelle doesn't like my ishes, but if you give me an ish.
We lost.
84.50.
84.
That wasn't bad, right?
That was good math, man.
So it's 13 cents approximately per $100,000 on the expense side and revenue side. That's a number that I use. Rob and you and I talk about that number a lot, the 13 cents per 100.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Again,
the question that
they haven't done the state budget yet, right? Like this time last year, we didn't have the 650. Actually, actually might have been right about this time last year that they did committee of conference, to be honest with you. It might have been September though, but
is it likely that won't happen until after the election is over?
Right.
And
they work on exactly, Rob. The first thing they do after the election, the new legislature, the governor and the new Senate will work on their budget, the 2-year biennium.
so that'll be a big piece of mystery for us as we're trying to do our planning, because right now the numbers don't look.
But they will give us a minimum we'll have a choice. We will know adequacy. We just won't know if there's any adequacy plus based on the budget. But we will have by the constitutional, right? The 3750 differentiated aid, all that's in the formula. They can't go lower than that. We just won't know if we go higher. So we will budget using the minimum while using what's constitutionally guaranteed. And last year we did that, but we were happy to have the 650.
Norm, you good there?
Yeah, that makes sense. So, yeah. I guess my other question is what's the percentage again for the retirement we're supposed to do, Steve? So with teachers' retirement, it's 13% this year. What is the?
Oh no.
No, what is it?
I can get it for you.
I'm just trying to paint a little circle here of, what we're committed to, kind of 84 cents loss.
Yeah, the finance, I want to say it's up 3%. I want to say
3%. Okay.
an increase of 3%, but you're right though. It's 15, 14. I've got it. I don't have it handy.
Okay.
But all this will be in my presentation on, and while we're at it, Norm, tonight, when you go to the budget committee, I don't know if you caught it. So their draft schedule has us presenting to the budget committee on January 7th.
Mm-hmm.
The last 2 years, we have not had a budget before the winter break. We came back after the winter break. So
Okay.
we won't really be able, it depends on the board, of course, but based on recent history, in order for us to meet that calendar, the January 7th calendar, we definitely have to have a budget in December. And that still requires Michelle, me, and you, Norm, to work during the Christmas holiday, during that to prepare. So we prefer that if we moved it to the 14th, that would be perfect. That would
Okay.
allow the board some breathing room so that, once, believe it or not, December 23rd at 9:30, the board agreed to a budget. And which is fun and all, but sometimes you want to take a deep breath, come back on January 2nd, January 3rd and have a budget.
So you want me to say that Steve has requested a January 14th presentation date?
Sure, you can say that Steve has requested, or you can say that the Hopkinton School Board past history hasn't adopted a budget until the first week of January, which would make it difficult for us to present.
The turnaround, yeah. Okay.
But
Yeah,
you can say it, Steve. Why not?
Yeah,
I'll
I'll put it
make-
on you.
Say the board. Kidding me?
I'll make that known, Steve.
Steve, I hate to beat the fund balance thing to death, but I know it's gonna keep coming back, so I'll just ask the social studies guy in the room. So we had said that in one of our discussions, it was less of a problem because we didn't bake it in, we didn't go out and spend. But the fund balance allows us essentially, if I'm understanding it right, to be at the tax rate we're at now for this year.
Yep.
So if somebody were to, because I could see somebody saying, well, I thought you told us that that was a surplus that more likely than not would be available at the end of the year. So why can't you use it against the shortfall? But we're already using it to maintain the tax rate where it is. So we need to increase that against the shortfall. Is that accurate?
Right. So, and this is what's always interesting. The tax rate is based on delta of last year. It's all delta. So we have, if we did exactly the same revenue as last year, the tax rate would be exactly the same. The tax rate doesn't go to zero.
Right.
You know what I mean? And the expense side, if we don't spend any money, the expense side is zero. But tax rate, the revenue side is always on the delta. So we set like we set the tax rate with 390. If we keep, and this is everything though. This is also other variables, Rob, that the board's going to have to wrestle with is maintenance trust.
Yep.
Do you want 150 there? Again, this is all based on delta, right? If you go to stay the same, you have 150. That's different. The expense side where we start from zero. In the revenue side, we start at at the same level as last year. So the board can also say, you know what, we're going to cut maintenance by 50, the special ed by 40, the vehicle by 15, contingency by $1.50, and squeeze not squeeze, but impact the tax rate in a reduction on that area as well. And the board makes all these decisions during the budget presentation process. First night we do expense, second night we do revenue and trust, third night we do taxes, tax rate combination, fourth night we vote, typically is the month we spend on budget. So that 390, if we keep the 390, then that's good, but it doesn't help us against the decreases, the delta that we've already have the decreases. We would have to increase that 390 to leverage or reduce the impact of the others.
So if we have maintenance trust in last year's that passed at 142.5 and we do 142.5 again, there is no impact on the tax rate.
Exactly. But one of the things that helps us,
go back and rework that because I think that I'm showing that differently and I'm going to want to take a peek through that and discuss it with you before we talk about it tomorrow night because it's definitely tweaking the numbers.
And one thing that helps us too is there was zero revenue from the Article 10. So like some years, say you put 100, well, next year you got to do 100 again, or you impacted your tax rate, right? Because it's delta.
Right.
And this year we didn't take any, right? Because we were, you know, we really wanted to, that was the 650. We had the 650, so we didn't have to take anything from tax rate stabilization, and we saved it. This is, remember, we went from 250 to 390. We put $1.40 in there. But
I'm
it
gonna
is,
turn it over to you when the time comes.
yeah, and we'll sit, and Michelle's really good, but when we finally get to the entire, that's when we do the entire warrant.
Right.
And that's when we add the warrant, is when we do the tax rate, because you have the budget and then you have each separate warrant article, that 13 cents here. Remember the 4-cent article?
Yeah.
And that's all
Yeah.
that adds up. And if you cut that, like, I think Michelle and I are going to recommend, it's not much, but we're not going to fund the vehicle trust this year because we contracted out the bus.
Mm-hmm.
And so like one year, I don't, Bob, you might remember, we had a health insurance trust.
Yes, I do remember that.
And because we were getting such volatility, and then one year we cashed it out because we had the Article 10 to use, and that was 100% revenue that year, which was great.
Right.
But next year we didn't have it, obviously, because we liquidated that trust. But the revenue is delta, the expense you start from zero. And that's what Michelle has taught me. You have to, just to keep the tax rate the same, you got to save exactly the same amount. Obviously, that's why the 650. If we got the 650 again, it wouldn't help our tax, right? It would just keep it stable.
Right.
If we got 1.3 million, we'd get an extra 650 on the tax rate.
So I'm going to change gears a little bit on this. So, right, this now that we're talking about Delta, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the bond for a second. So we talked a little bit today, Steve, about this. The tax impact for this year was 10 cents.
Yep.
And then next year, we are going to have 38 cents because we're taking out the whole bond, correct?
So, right. So
let's be clear on that. So I want to make.
So this year, because we didn't get the proceeds, right, until our first payment on the bond is only going to be a 6-month payment.
Yep.
Right, because we bought the bond in July, our first payment's like 6 months later. Michelle will tell you exactly why, right? But it's only 6 months worth of payments.
Yep.
Next year, we're going to have 12 months worth of payments on the first bond.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to have 6 months worth of payments, or whatever, on the new bond. And they won't become full year payments until year 3.
And so between now and next year, the delta would be 38. Would be 38 because the 10 cents would cancel out each other because it's the same thing, right? From this year to this year. So next year would be just 38, right?
And then we have the new bond.
The new bond, the next budget would be total like 80 cents of it.
Right. So for this budget, we are going to budget half a year on our second bond and a full year on our first bond. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So half a year was this budget we're in right now, which is 10 cents. And then next year we're doing 12 months, which is going to be 38 cents, and then 6 months on the past.
And I'm just using 6 months for our discussion purposes. I don't know exactly when that payment's going to be.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's good. It's good to know that's clear, because I'm sure it'll come up a little bit tonight, but that makes sense.
And just because I know it's a struggle, and I know if it gets to 76 cents, right? Right now, if the rates stay this low, the whole bond could be 76 cents.
Yeah.
But remember, when we presented the bond to the community in March of 2019, the estimated tax impact, $1.04.
Yeah.
And we are getting 4 classrooms, fire suppression, a new hallway for an elevator. It's a good project.
Oh, yeah.
And we're getting it for, I hope, if the rates stay this low, we're going to get it for under 80 cents, when our estimate to the community on the slide that I put on that slide, to be honest, right, was $1.04.
Yeah, it's 28 cents.
That's real. That's at 13 cents 100,000. That's $250,000 a year for 20 years.
Yeah. a lot.
That's I mean, if we didn't pull the trigger on this, remember we were talking about that last year, not pulling the trigger on the bond? It would have cost $4 million.
Yeah.
And we got, yeah, I mean, and the 4 classrooms and the fire suppression. You know,
Rob,
when I presented it to the town, or sorry, when Dave or Liz, it was no fire suppression in 3 classrooms.
And I think, you know, for the budget this year, Steve, I think it's important we make that clear that it was a good thing and that we were able to, what we got out of it and the savings we're getting, I can defend it. And I think it's a great thing. I just, you know, what I've said to Rob and I said to you, you know, I really want to have that be painted in the corner saying this is, you know, it's part of the budget at some capacity, but, you know, we can't.
And a new office suite at Harold, that was never presented. You know, a guidance office, a principal's office, and a conference room, and fire suppression, and 4 classrooms, and a whole elevator hallway, and other stuff.
Yep, you're right.
And I don't mean to I just want to keep that. I'm amazed that, right, $1.04. The community voted for $1.04 for less project than they're getting, and they're getting more for less. How often does that happen?
Not a lot, but
Yeah.
So
And COVID
thank you
happened.
both for your strong support this summer when we were going through very, very difficult budget times about saving money, but the board had the fortitude to put it through and really help this community, I think, for years. But I'm biased.
so once these changes, it's 76 moving on for the next 17 years because that's when it starts to be locked in for both bonds.
Yes,
Correct.
and then one bond will come off first.
Yep.
And the other one will stay, right? You'll have the same decrease on the end, right?
Yep.
Because
Yep.
we're 1 year ahead in the bond.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yep. Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, thank you, Norm. All right, want to check in, see if Tammy has a question? Tammy, if you're there and you have a question, you can put your hand up and Steve will fire you up. If not, we're gonna say goodnight.
And Rob, and I'll have Donna work on our in-person just work session to take a look at forms.
Okay.
And I would love
And
to
I
be there if I can.
Absolutely.
Definitely want to check in tomorrow with you, Steve, about this spreadsheet before
Yep.
we. 'cause
I'll give you a
it-
buzz. My morning's pretty open, Rob. I'll give you a buzz in the morning.
All right, sounds good.
Hey,
We'll
thank you
talk to
both.
later.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you, guys.
Yep, have a good night.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Good luck tonight, Norm.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate your help.